This week on Book Talk, my guests are Dr. Stephen Muse and Chaplain Michael Hart. When Hearts Become a Flame is a book that really talks about taking an Eastern Orthodox approach to pastoral counseling. It's a series of essays that integrates the scientific knowledge and practice with a kind of theological truth as seen from the perspective of Dr. Stephen Muse, the writer. Dr. Muse is a clinical director for the Pastoral Counseling Training Program and Clinical Services for the DA and Elizabeth Turner Ministry Resource of the Pastoral Center here at Columbus, Georgia. Dr. Muse also serves as a part-time instructor here at Columbus State University in our graduate counseling program. And also with me today is Chaplain Mike Hart, a Family Life Center chaplain and graduate student in our community counseling program at Columbus State University. Dr. Muse and Chaplain Hart, welcome to Book Talk. Glad you could join.
Thanks, Rick.
Dr. Muse, I'll start with you. It has to do with the title. You talk about sort of when hearts become flame. The choice of the word heart instead of heart basically sort of led me to think you're talking about a sort of shared humanity in the way that you're thinking about this book. Maybe overanalyzing a little bit, but could you tell me what led you to the title, When Hearts Become Flame?
Well, there's a story in the Gospel according to Luke where after the crucifixion of Jesus, two of his disciples are walking down the road and they're talking about these things. And a stranger appears, and they don't know who it is. And the peculiar thing about this is that, of course, it's Christ. And they don't discover this till they hear him speak, and their hearts burn, and he's about to go on, and they say, "Stay with us." This "stay with us" for me and the burning of the heart is we don't really meet others until we've welcomed them in such a way that we discover something far beyond what we expect in the beginning.
Okay. So it is about a reaching out and a willingness to stay once you've done the reaching out as opposed to...
Yeah, reaching out way beyond where you would expect because they were in grief. Their whole life was in turmoil at that point. For them to welcome a stranger in and say, "Stay with us," in the midst of that's just extraordinary. And this is sort of epitomizes what a therapist is being asked if they truly reach out in love and empathy for another person. They're going to go beyond what they are sort of naturally, automatically ready to do.
Yeah. When I think a little bit about our graduate program here, we train our students to work with individuals and couples and families. How do you see, this sort of idea of informing them about their work? How does this book kind of contribute to the work of somebody who's going to move into the community here in Columbus, Georgia? Well,
in one sense, what I'm talking about is how basically the therapeutic encounter is a real meeting with someone. So it's about love, and it's about continual self-examination of the therapist. So each person we meet is a confrontation in the form of the uniqueness that they are, which I've never encountered before. So essentially, my entire experience is the proverbial log in my eye, so that I am always trying to see how it is I can encounter the one who is beyond what I've already experienced. This is a kind of, it suggests that the counseling enterprise is a spiritual formation process for the therapist, because each person will take them beyond where they've been before. Okay. So it's a mutual, reciprocal affecting. Not only is the client affected, but the therapist is affected.
Chaplain Hart, you've obviously been affected. You spent some time working with individuals, couples, and families. You've also spent some time thinking of this from a sort of counseling pastor point of view. Did this book stimulate some thinking on your part to think differently about that work?
It really has. the concept of the dialogos has been very, very challenging and in a lot of ways very enlightening to me. It seemed very simple, yet on the other hand, so foreign to the culture that we're in. And I can see that even in the relationships that I consider to be very close, there's still an element of that, to a very real extent, I want to stay behind my fig leaf, and I'd really be more comfortable if you stayed behind yours. So it has really challenged me to look at not only my counseling relationships, but my normal everyday life relationships as well. And my seminary experience, I think, was not unlike that of many others, especially in evangelical seminaries, where the amount of education and training that we receive in counseling is minimal at best. So what I read, as I read the book, really what has challenged me is that I really need to have an awareness of myself, and real open, honest awareness of myself before I can really begin to relate to others, particularly those that are in the counseling room with me. Dr. Muse, you wrote that pastoral counseling is, by definition, a trialogue with God, with others, and with self. That what makes counseling pastoral is that it's an encounter between two hearts, as opposed to two masks. Or three hearts. Yeah. Or two hearts, where then the third is in the midst of that when those come together. Yeah. As opposed to the interaction of the two press secretaries. I like the analogy you use of the press secretary. And that really strikes me as a significant paradigm shift, or really maybe more correctly, a paradigm recovery when it comes to human interaction. I think you can walk into a lot of churches in America, and the pastoral counseling that one receives is a scriptural principle that is delivered in the form of an admonition or advice or rebuke or some other kind of detached interaction. And I think the book for me has really underscored the value of empathy, that empathy comes from a heart that truly sees the other as a beloved of God and desires to encounter that heart as opposed to encountering the fig leaves. And I wonder if you could speak more to the kind of empathy or perhaps the nuances of empathy that you see that are organic to pastoral counseling as opposed to secular therapy.
Well, thank you for beautifully putting that. In terms of, if you want to focus on what empathy is within pastoral counseling, I would say that has to do ultimately with freedom. Freedom to be in the process of becoming who I am. So the thing you mentioned, the press secretary, there's all sorts of things that constrict us and stop us from being able to experience our experience and make choices moment to moment. So if we think of whatever oppresses the spirit, family of origin, scripts that we take as divine, commands when they're really not, cultural introjections, all sorts of things serve as false gods. So in one sense, empathy is directly related to the liberation of the soul to actually encounter the other in the presence of God. So this is a huge thing, far beyond a purely psychological thing that I can do. I must be vulnerable to something beyond my own power and ability. So it's doing therapy is somewhat like, very much so, entering prayer, and requires all the ascetical strictures that render us vulnerable to the other.
I've often wondered if what is commonly accepted as pastoral counseling might not be part of the reason for the marginalization of Christianity in the church in America, where we're encountering hungry people, but rather than offering them steak, we're maybe showing them a picture of it.
Well, if you mean by that the church has sold out to business and psychology per se, I think yes, exactly. And so what you said earlier about this recovering something, I think is really important, because pastoral care has been around for thousands of years and is employed in various ways in cultures all over the world. And we have we're emerging out of a Western European bias about what pastoral care is. And this book is very much from an Eastern Christian perspective, which is culturally different and it's philosophically different than what the West does.
The influence of John Wayne goes far and wide.
Yeah, and if I could just respond to one thing, for example, I'm suggesting that it's when Christ is between us that hearts meet. So in passing in this way, in encountering the other, there's a paradox here. I encounter Christ, I encounter the other. If I refuse the other, if I refuse to encounter the other, I refuse Christ. When I meet the other through Christ, now the other becomes more important than me, so it enters the territory that Levinas speaks of, where the other is our ethical context. To lay one's life down for the other is what Christ does. So when you're talking about empathy and love, if Christ is in our midst, my job is to repent, and now the other becomes the one that is beyond my capacity to diagnose. I can only love the other and enter into relationship with them.
The thing that really struck me too was your talk of Nicodemus's interaction with Jesus, and I had to. That was novel for me, and as I went back and thought about it, it made so much sense that Nicodemus comes to Jesus in John chapter 3, and Rabbi, we know you're a teacher because, and that they
teacher come from God.
You were a teacher come from God because of, and all these reasons, and how that really was representative of the attempt to almost categorize and manage God from within the framework that we're comfortable using. And it struck me that the verses that jumped out at me were, in Deuteronomy 4 and in Deuteronomy 9 speaks of our God is a consuming fire, and I think of God as a fire that engulfs us and envelops me and overtakes me, and how we have. In a lot of ways, we've reduced God from the consuming fire to the campfire.
Mm-hmm.
That I can manage, and I've got the rocks around it, and I can control it, and I can light it when I want to, and I can douse it when I want to.
Yes.
And I can go near it to get warm when I want to, and I can back away from it when I want to.
This is God as the slot machine. This is the Feuerbachian God that is man-made. And what you're pointing out with Nicodemus, I think, Nicodemus is an example of a totalizing ontology where he took the log in his own eye, he took his culture, he took his learning, and presumed to identify who Christ was. This is exactly the mistake psychology has made with theology, which is to assume it can judge it rather than encounter it and be changed by it. And this, I'm suggesting, we have to do with one another, enter into that context.
It seems that we would rather understand God.
Sure.
Than encounter God.
Sure, and you too. To encounter you is to be changed. So it's much easier to have control.
And I would say that is very likely then what I'm going to do with my clients is I'd rather understand them and label them and find what page on the DSM-4 refers to them rather than encounter the person.
Which is iatrogenically a problem because it damages people to assimilate them, to in some way define them, to label them and stand outside of them is a problem. And this is possibly a Western cultural problem because we have such a problem with assimilation and colonialism and...
they become objects.
Yeah.
And I've wondered if what you write about as pastoral counseling, if that's not what human interaction was meant to be before the fall.
I hope so.
But now it's just so foreign and so opposite to our nature. Post fall of man, that we struggle and have to labor very hard in order to be authentic.
This is the question that I think Christianity puts to us, which is the condition that you're in normal, or can you see that there's a possibility of being loved in a way that goes beyond your own attempt to save your life, and that this is the essence of who you are as a human being? This is huge.
Well, and as you're talking about it, I keep thinking, both this theme of empathy, and then there's a kind of authenticity theme that is now emerging, is a problem. It's a problem, not only for pastors, but it's a problem for anybody who's doing mental health counseling. You wrote a chapter that I loved it. The label is post-traumatic spiritual disorder.
And the false history syndrome.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a key point.
Okay. And it really seemed to be about this kind of loss of connection, loss of community. If I understood what you were saying, am I right?
Definitely about the loss of community, and about how community is defined by the historians from a certain point of view. And usually if the lion writes history, the lamb doesn't have a heart that's equal. And so what I'm looking at was how, for example, American culture has, I would say, a trauma in it from the treatment of the indigenous people and then slavery, which we haven't fully come to terms with. And just like a trauma affects, we see in therapy, an individual family for several generations, our culture at the systemic level is struggling with a trauma, and there are areas that we don't want to look at. We didn't want to used to look at pastoral abuse. We didn't want to look at domestic violence against women. There's always things that need to be looked at like we would in the therapy room at the cultural level. So what I'm suggesting is that justice issues are equally important to pastoral counseling, and that also spiritual warfare at the systemic level is equally important as the spiritual warfare of watchfulness in terms of what goes on in the interior of the heart. And certainly from the psychological standpoint, for Freud to have denied women's reality in his very theory takes a long time to recover from. Yeah.
Dr. Albert Rossi, a psychologist, said some profound and very useful insights are found within the cover of these pages. With me today has been the writer of these pages, Dr. Stephen Muse. Dr. Muse is Director for the Pastoral Counseling Training Program and Clinical Services for the D.A. and Elizabeth Turner Ministry Resource Center of the Pastoral Institute here in Columbus, Georgia. Also with me has been Chaplain Michael Hart, graduate student in the program here.
Good last name.
And once again, the book is titled When Hearts Become Flame. Thank you for joining us. I'm Dr. Richard Long, and this has been another edition of Book Talk.